All right. Happy New Year, everybody. 2025. Who knew that we were going to get this far into the new millennium? So, as we're waiting for people to come stream in, I'll just say I hope that all of you had a great holiday season. It's a little weird being back to work this particular year because Christmas Eve and Christmas were in the middle of the week, and then the same thing with New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So it's a Thursday and we're just getting back to work. Hey Harold, good to see you here. And it's kind of a weird time schedule wise. Glad that everybody can make it here. So, oh, good. Mark is here as well. And Shirley Ann, good to see you here as well. So, let's get underway. It's just the second day in this new year of 2025. And as usual, people have posted in social media about the various resolutions they've made. And it's very often the case that people say, and you may have said this yourself, and I know I certainly have, this is going to be the year that I do X. And we often make these as New Year's resolutions. And, hey, Sonny, good to see you here too, as well. So, this is a tradition and practice that goes back a long, long ways. There's various histories trying to trace it back to ancient Mesopotamia or, ancient Rome or places like that. But it's very clear that certainly within our lifetimes, people have been making and usually breaking New Year's resolutions for a long, long time. There's cartoons about it from the 1920s, from papers. And so New Year's is kind of an interesting time if you think about it from a philosophical perspective. It's a decent time, and it's not unique, of course, but it's a good a time as any to take stock of your life and your achievements and failures and the potential of the time that you still have left, and to try to deliberately choose a path forward for improving your life. And at the same time, this is part of why I'm having this workshop. New Year's resolutions often cause people who make them a good bit of anguish and stress and anxiety and frustration. And if you're, subject to depression, particularly here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a dark time of year. If you, make big resolutions and then they don't come true because you feel like you fail, that could feed into that. And there's even a day now recognized as Quitter's Day, which is the second Friday of the year. And why do they call it that? Because by that day, many people have already broken and perhaps even abandoned their New Year's resolutions. So this is clearly an issue, right? So I've got some goals for this workshop. One of them is for us to understand better why New Year's resolutions are not as beneficial an approach to making lasting positive changes in one's own life as we often assume they are. And then, to think about what better replacements we might come up with and then shift to and what makes them better. And so I'm going to be arguing a little bit later that instead of having resolutions, maybe we want to have goals, habits, things like that instead. And I'm also going to suggest that, and you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I'm going to suggest that whatever New Year's resolutions you made this year, that you abandon them willingly, deliberately, choosing to do so, and that you can feel okay about that. And then, think about what sort of alternatives you might formulate for yourself. And we can have a great conversation here in the chat about that. So I'm going to begin with an idea coming from Seneca in his works, some of the letters and also his On Anger, where he is discussing these two emotions of anger and grief. And he gives this advice consistently that these emotions are going to most likely wear themselves out and end at a certain point. And it would be actually better for you to deliberately stop them, or do practices that would make them end earlier, rather than just waiting for them to peter out. And I think we can have a similar proactive approach towards our New Year's resolutions, where we can say, well, if we made them, it's okay for us to break them, even though society is telling us that we shouldn't. And we can break them on our own time and terms. Enric says, I don't usually make New Year's resolutions. And I don't either. Not these days. I used to in the past. It would be interesting too. Well, we'll talk about this in just a bit. I'll do a little bit of polling of the people participating in this in just a minute. But let's talk about what New Year's resolutions are. So if we think about the key features, right? What is a resolution to begin with? It's a deliberate commitment to change something. Could be one's whole life. It could be your mindset, your behavior, relationships. And we generally are going to do things that we think are positive. They might not be positive. I could say, well, I'm going to, start running every single day. And that would be terrible for me, because I'm not in good shape, and I'm missing two ligaments in one knee. And if I did do that, I would probably destroy the knee. But, I could be deluded about what's actually good for me. Or if I'd, read somewhere that eating a bit of chocolate every day is good for you, I could be like, oh, I'm going to max out on chocolate every single day. And that would not be good for me, but I could be mistaken about that. So people commit to something that they think is good for them. And why do we call it a New Year's resolution? Well, either we make it New Year's Day, or more frequently, we make it before New Year's, oftentimes New Year's Eve. Not a good time to do it, as we'll talk about in just a minute. And it could be something that has to be worked towards and is measured or assessed at the end of the year. Like, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, or I'm going to make $50,000 more than I did last year, both of which are very difficult to do, I think. Or much more often, they're about daily or weekly things, and they could be negative or positive. So, for example, somebody might say, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to stop smoking cigarettes, or I'm going to quit drinking alcohol, or I'm going to cut sugar out of my life, right? And they're saying, I'm going to do that the entire time of this period. Or they could say something like, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to take a walk every day, or I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. So what we're doing there is we're committing ourselves to something that applies to a time frame, and we do something sort of punctually, either saying no to something or saying yes to something. So the other thing that's really, I would say, defining of New Year's resolutions, that makes them resolutions as opposed to just goals, is that they're typically framed as commitments that once they're broken, they're completely broken. So even if you start back up, you're starting up a damaged resolution, right? That's different than establishing yourself a kind of goal or something else more broad. It's sort of like making a vow. It's sort of like getting married, right? If you cheat, well, you've cheated, and you can't unring that bell, as we say, right? And we could go on and on and on. So let's do a little bit of like sounding board stuff here. How many of you, some of you have already weighed in and said, I don't typically make New Year's resolutions. How many of you actually do make New Year's resolutions at, each year perhaps, or certain intervals? Any of you do that typically? I used to, because I was from a family where we did that, but I don't do that anymore. And I've actually encouraged my kids not to do that sort of thing. My wife and I don't do that. Do any of you make resolutions every year? Mark says not formally, no. Enric said, I have purposes I'm already pursuing and looking to make them more successful in the coming year. And that's good. That's kind of where we're going with this. Um, did anyone make a New Year's resolution this year? And here's another question to think about in the past, right? those of you who've made resolutions in the past, have you been able to go more than a month in the past without breaking your resolution? I typically wasn't, but I was picking things that were, for me, unrealistic. I mean, I've talked about this in videos. I've quit smoking. It's really easy to do. I've done it so many times in the past before it finally stuck. But, if you don't change other factors. So Red Violet says, not currently, I have in the past. Sunny Blue, for some years, I refined my reading list as a form resolution to read more and prioritize week or month to month. It's hard. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will have resolutions like, I'm going to read 100 books this year, right? Or I'm going to read a book every single day. I mean, unless you're reading like picture books, that's probably totally unrealizable. I'm going to exercise every single day. That's probably not going to work either. Okay, so let's talk about New Year's resolutions a bit. Are there any good features to them? Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to knock them. I'm not trying to say nobody should ever make a New Year's resolution. New Year's could be an opportune time for, thinking about your life and making decisions about the direction for your life. You get a bit of time off. New Year's Day, it's usually pretty quiet. All the stores are shut. So, unless your family's over and in your business, it might be a good time just to sit quietly. And I think it's always good to think about your own life and how to improve it, right? That's not a bad thing. And you can think about the person that you aren't yet, but you would like to be, and how to move towards that and what concrete steps would be required. So, I mean, that's good stuff, right? Now, I'm going to read you another passage from Seneca that's been circulating around as people can't resist posting it on social media. And I'm going to unpack it a bit as well. So Seneca actually in letter 16, very early in the letter says, it's important for you to keep the resolutions you've already made. It's more important for you to keep the resolutions you've already made than to go on and make noble ones. You must persevere, must develop new strength by continuous study until that which is only a good inclination becomes a good settled purpose. So you could read this two different ways. One would be, well, whatever resolutions you made in the past, if they were good ones, don't make any new ones. Stick with the ones that you already made. Or it could be, hey, this is the year to actually make some good resolutions. Now, resolution, it's one way to translate the term that Seneca is using there, and it's one that has in one of the popular translations, I think, and that's why it's been circulating around. Proposita is the Latin term, and it could mean plans, it could mean intentions, it can mean resolutions if you want to. And the noble ones, honesta, morally good, upright. Persevere is, persevere, and we're going to talk about why that's important later. But what's really interesting here, so what is only a good inclination becomes a good settled purpose. Not the best translation. Donec bona mens sit, quod bona voluntas est, right? So there's two terms there. One is mind, and it's a very broad term, the whole of your thinking faculties. And then voluntas means your will, your choice, right? So you commit yourself first, and you want that to turn into the totality of who you are and how you approach things, right? And I think that's part of what's behind our talk about resolutions. If I do this, if I commit to this, then I'm going to be this kind of person over here. So what can we do that's going to work out better for us in that way? Well, so one thing we can think about at the start that I think takes maybe a little bit of the weight away from resolutions is we can ask ourselves, okay, we're making a commitment. Who are we actually making this commitment to when we make a New Year's resolution? So one natural answer is, of course, ourselves, right? But if that's the case, then we've got a lot of freedom with what we want to do with them. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And the other thing that we could say is, well, if we're really making a commitment to ourselves, why do we care what other people think about our resolutions? And why do we publicize them and discuss them with other people? Maybe we're making a commitment. This is another suggestion that some people have made to our future self, the self that we want to be, which is, imaginary or fictional or potential. It's not something real. Maybe we're making our New Year's resolutions to other people. But if that's the case, who are we making it to? The whole world? If I put it out there on Twitter or Facebook, or if I put out a YouTube video about my resolutions for the year, does that mean I'm committing to every single person on YouTube who's watching? That would seem kind of weird. And how in the hell do I make a commitment to people that I don't even know who might follow me in social media? And why would I do that? Right? Maybe we're making a commitment to something transcendent, like, God or the gods or the universe. And I mean, if that's the case, that seems a little odd, doesn't it? That we would deliberately once a year make some massive commitment like that to whatever it is that is transcendent, as we say, bigger than us. So, we should ask ourselves, okay, who's this, supposed commitment to? And then, here's some other things to think about. Here's why making New Year's resolutions can be negative or problematic. And I think a lot of us have experienced this over the years. So this claim that I started out with, this is going to be the year. Whenever we do that, we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, a lot more pressure than we can probably bear and see through. So I don't think we want to make big sweeping claims like that. We're also, when we make a New Year's resolution, we're picking a time of the year that for many of us is not the best time to do it. We don't really have enough time over the holidays. And there's nothing magical about New Year's. It might actually be the worst time to do it, particularly if we're partying and drinking. We wake up the next day and we're like, oh, I'll never drink again. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course you're going to, give it a week or so. Another problem is we make a commitment for an entire year, and we're often not that good at making commitments for and seeing them through for an entire year. Here we go, Blue Sky said, I have weekly resolutions, but hard to keep, right? Weekly resolutions are tough enough to do. And I would say, we probably need to measure ourselves before we start making huge, grand commitments. I mean, definitely don't make any 10-year commitments about where you're going to be 10 years from now. Maybe a month by month or week by week is enough. We also tend to be, overly general or vague in the resolutions we make. I'm going to live a healthier lifestyle. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be a nicer person. Well, what does that actually mean? We have to parse that out and figure out what is actually being required of us, what is being demanded by ourselves of a future self. Another common issue that I think is going to lead us into problems, focusing on framing matters in terms of one main change rather than thinking about the pattern, because all of us have fairly established characters, we have histories, we exist within narratives. You're probably not just going to tweak one thing in your life without it being connected to other matters. And then, another thing that I think is really difficult for quite a few people, being overly rigid about what counts as continuing to fulfill the resolution. We need to recognize flexibility in our lives and our actions and our mindsets and stuff like that. And something that's closely connected to that, making commitments for ourselves that unreasonably or unrealistically depend on other persons or things to work. So I can make a commitment that I'm going to lose 50 pounds this year and get down. What would that take me to? Like 205, my fighting weight or something like that. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't know that my body would actually cooperate with that, but that's going to require not only that I change my diet, but that my wife also changes her diet, and that I don't participate in a lot of things, and that I exercise, and that the gym is open when I need it to be, and, right? You see how that works? And I think there's a lot of things like that where we make a commitment, but we don't realize that we're kind of depending on other people to help us out with that commitment as well. And then the biggest thing, and we're going to talk about this at the end, is we're unrealistic about what it means to succeed in moving our life in the right way. I mean, we should expect that we are going to screw up early on and often. And ideally, we get, less and less failures along the way. But we generally don't start out by making some massive change. I'm going to read a book every single day. Well, if you're not used to doing that, that is going to be pretty tough. And you're going to find yourself probably, forgetting to do it, or not having the time to do it, or being too tired or something like that. And you're going to fail early on. And then you're going to feel like crap, right? So we probably need to keep that in mind, right? Um, I'm going to actually take one of the comments here, and then we'll come back to what I've got in the notes. So this is from Real Gee Machine. I'm put this up here. I like the idea we align to some transcendent thing, maybe like the categorical imperative is an example. I only want to be a better human, even if that means moving the scales bit by bit. So here's that's an interesting point. The categorical imperative probably not going to be that helpful unless you decide that you're going to actually take one of them and say, I'm going to be a good Kantian, and from this point on I'm working towards the kingdom of ends, or I'm going to use humanity only as a end rather than a means, right? Treat humanity as an end rather than a means, and pick some determinate thing. I kind of think that we might be better off without bringing anything transcendent in there. I mean, if you need something transcendent to be accountable to, that somehow will, in fact, hold you accountable, that might be a bit tricky, right? To find something like that. Maybe we need things that are a little bit lower scale, I would say. So, all right. Let's talk about breaking New Year's resolutions. So this often happens, right? Most people don't succeed in whatever New Year's resolutions they make. And what is the result? So some people, when that happens, they're like, oh, well, screw it. I've already broken the resolution. So better luck next year. I'll just abandon the resolution altogether. And, that's probably not going to be a very productive thing, especially if you picked something that was, in fact, an area of your life that you want to work on, something that it would be good for you to change. Other people can find themselves very upset about not following through. They can beat themselves up saying, oh, this is terrible. I'm only a week in or a month in, and I couldn't even stick to this resolution that I made. I'm such a loser. And you don't have to do that. That's actually a mistaken, I would say, approach to these things, or interpretation. Another thing that's very common with people, and I've done this myself, is after you've screwed up, you make a deal with yourself. You're like, well, okay, I've screwed up today, but tomorrow I'm going to make up for it. I'm going to do twice what I was supposed to do today. And this could be exercise. That's not going to work. You can't just keep heaping more and more up, or that could be reading, or that could be whatever it is that you want, right? you're really not going to be able to figure out how to make up that gap. Another thing you might do, just totally deny that you even broke or even made the resolution. Some people are able to handle the cognitive dissonance that comes with that sort of thing. But I think that, these are not particularly helpful approaches. So maybe what we want to do is, if we made a resolution, give ourselves permission at this point in time to break them, and then find something better, something that'll do the same work, but will not come with the same, let's say, bad commitments that we otherwise would be dragging along with us. So, another thing that we can do is begin again, but with a goal. And if we do that, then breaking it becomes a lot more manageable, right? Because when we fail, which we're going to do, we can say, well, I failed, right? So what am I going to do with that? We can say, well, I'll make a new start. We have to determine what we're going to do going forward, instead of being backwards looking and being like, oh, screw it, I failed, so I'm off my diet, I'll eat whatever the hell I want to. Well, that's not going to be very useful for us. And here's another thing to keep in mind: the New Year's resolutions are for us. So maybe whatever resolutions or even goals we made for ourselves, maybe they're not the ones that we needed to. We can give ourselves permission to reconsider or even revise our resolutions. And here's another thing. So, I think somebody brought up stuff about, yeah, so it's Sunny. The pressure I can generate in myself in terms of keeping time or tabs with the grand and New Year's reading goals I found in the past shatters the serenity of reading. Yeah. So sometimes there's that aspect of being committed to something makes it less fun, right? But where does the pressure actually come from that we're placing upon ourselves? We can ask ourselves, why don't we give ourselves permission to be rational and revise the goals that we have, right? Colonel Kurtz has an interesting observation. True about breaking resolutions. Marathon is better than a sprint. I kept falling back on progress because I lacked self-compassion. That is a significant issue for many of us, right? We're often, and we can often be quite compassionate to other people, but we don't cut ourselves the same slack, right? Now, plenty of people are the opposite, where they're willing to make exceptions for themselves, but not for other people. But that certainly can be a problem. So let's talk about goals, right? Why do we want to use goals rather than resolutions? So they're both future oriented, but a resolution places an emphasis on the past, making the resolution. It kind of locks you in, so to speak. And I think that instead of making a resolution for a year, we should recognize what our goals are and then think in shorter time frames, weeks, months, right? And goals are sort of ideals that we're trying to hit down the line. Maybe not this year. Maybe some of them are going to take a couple years. And the ways in which we attain or reach a goal can be modified, the means, right? We can think about the appropriateness of them. And we could use resolutions, perhaps, so we could understand them as means towards goals that we're setting for ourselves. But then maybe they're not a good means. Maybe we want more flexible means. We can focus on planning and timelines and criteria for ourselves. And goals are better than resolutions, I would say, because when we fail, which we're going to do, we don't necessarily have to feel as bad. Now, if we're perfectionists, we can take goals and screw them up as well, right? But most of us aren't suffering too much from that. And we can get ourselves on track again with less drama and less guilt, which is just counterproductive The what we want is to attain what we think is good for ourselves. So, is feeling guilty a good means to that? Probably not. Is engaging in all sorts of drama and posting about things online, how you failed and you're going to get back up? Probably not a good means, right? What you want to do is just reassess, okay, what went wrong? And so when we're thinking about goals, we want to pick goals that are actually going to work for ourselves. So we don't want the huge, this is the year when I totally transform my life and emerge from my chrysalis as the beautiful butterfly I've always thought I was going to be. What we want is more mundane stuff. So, we can think about autonomy for ourselves instead of taking ready-made goals or advice from other people or the culture, the media, or people who are set to exploit us. I'm sure I haven't actually canvassed this, but I'm willing to bet there's tons of like workshops that you can pay for as opposed to free ones like this. And they'll, walk you through how to make yourself, more successful financially, or your dating can be better, or your body can be more beautiful, or pick whatever you want, right? That's probably not helpful for you, right? I mean, you can pick those things, but it has to be your choice, not somebody else telling you that you should do it. So what would make for good goals? I've got some suggestions, and I'd be interested to see what the rest of you think. So here's one that I think we should do. We're all, flawed and dealing with negative emotions like anxiety or anger or being troubled or other strong emotional responses, right? What would help us to be more free from those? In my case, I've struggled with anger pretty much my whole life. It's certainly gotten better over the last couple decades through largely using exercises from philosophy. So, continuing that path can be a good one for me, maybe for some of you as well. Maybe some of you struggle with depression and grief and things like that, or anxiety. So, what can we actually do? What goals can we select? We have the big goal of not feeling bad, but then what are the means goals that would lead us to that we could select for ourselves? And we could also think about areas of our lives where we still find ourselves making bad choices and maybe even justifying or excusing those, unhealthy habits that we have, reactions that we get involved with that we can recognize as we're doing it aren't good for us. And we also have to think about what lies within our own power. What is up to us, to use the Stoic and Aristotelian way of looking at it. By the way, that term "up to us," "not up to us," first in Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, but then becomes very important for the Stoics. And we can say, "Oh, I'm going to make more money," which would make me more free. But what is it going to take to actually get more money? And is it going to make you less free in the process? Are these matters really up to us? You can try to make more money, but you may not actually wind up making more money. And we here's another thing that I think is useful from ancient philosophy. We need to consider realistically what kinds of prices we're going to have to pay, what sacrifices we're going to have to make. So if I want to exercise 3 times a week for 2.5 hours, getting to the gym, getting back, and stuff like that. That time has to come from somewhere. If I want to, devote myself to reading more, well, where is that time going to come from? I have to, I'm going to eat more healthy, not eat out as much, cook my own meals. Well, am I going to do grocery shopping? Am I going to, how often am I going to cook? Am I going to eat leftovers? These are all practical things we have to think about. And so what kind of lifestyle changes will we need to do? And here's where we, wind up thinking about habits and routines. So if we want to really change our lives, we need to think about what sort of lasting changes in ourselves we would actually need to make. So, a lot of this is about building routines instead of a goal to, like, say, lose 20 pounds. We can say, well, I'm going to go to the gym regularly, not necessarily obsessively 5 days a week, but I'm going to try to get there at least 3 times a week. And if you're doing something, probably you're going to lose some weight, right? Maybe you won't lose 20 pounds. As a matter of fact, maybe as you start doing things, you actually gain weight because you're shedding fat and gaining muscle. Muscle weighs more than fat. But you can be realistic about this sort of thing. And our goals are about changing our habits over time. And so, breaking bad habits, modifying habits to make them a little bit more, rational, building new habits, all of that is important. And so, what we have to do is be brutally honest with ourselves about the habits that we actually have, right? And, we can we can think about this in terms of the future us that we want to be, that the routine is going to help lead us to. And, it might be helpful for some of you to write down your intentions, what it is that you want to do. Maybe you store them in your head. We can also sometimes motivate ourselves by imposing consequences on ourselves, having somebody make us be accountable, right? Or, like, some people actually find it helpful to have put a little bit of money on the line, right? I don't myself, but some people do that. So, the other thing that I'm going to say, and then we'll take some of these comments. We're going to fail, right? So, how do you deal productively and prudently with the failures that you're going to have? One common mistake is relying too much on willpower rather than on routines and habits, right? Willpower will only take you so far. As a matter of fact, again, ancient philosophy, none of them are like hardcore, as we call it in philosophy, voluntarists, where they're like, hey, anybody can do anything. You can always choose. No, they're very clear that our ideas and assumptions and habits, they're tough to change. They're all like one big complex. And so, when we fail, we got to look at that and say, okay, what actually went wrong? We have to persevere, and that goes back to Seneca, right? So persevering, what does it actually mean? Saint Anselm has a great definition of this in his On Freedom of Choice. He says to persevere is to will the same thing over and over and over again. And we that's what we have to do. We can make a choice or commitment at the start, but then we have to do it the next time and the next time and the next time. So if I say I'm going to the gym 3 days a week, 3 days a week, I need to actually make a choice to go to the gym, right? I can't just rely on my previous choice carrying me through. And then I think, and somebody mentioned this to before, being forgiving towards ourselves. Again, somebody who's good with this is Seneca. He talks about, this is in On Anger. He talks about this practice that he took from Sextius, who is a Roman philosopher, but the Pythagoreans also did this, of like each day as he's going to sleep, thinking, okay, what did I do well? Where did I screw up? And then he says, I censure myself and then I forgive myself and say, let's do better tomorrow. Right? Rather than just like marinating or ruminating in guilt or something like that. And then the other thing that I think is absolutely irreplaceable, and a lot of people, I would say, mess this up for themselves. And this may be reflective of a kind of perfectionism. When you have done something, so like, let's say we take exercise, right? Let's say that you only make it to the gym one day a particular week because you're very busy. You're also feeling run down. You don't have the energy for it. You still made it to the gym that one time. And even though it's short of 3, it's still something good. Even if, or let's say you go 3 times, but you don't put in the full workout that you feel that you ought to, you've still done something. If you're going to read, this happens to me all the time. I set myself particular, I need to read. For me, it's less about, I'm setting myself some goals for reading. It's more like, oh man, I'm going to be teaching this class. I need to read this. This client wants this. And everything takes longer than it should, right? So I don't always read as much as I'd like. I still read something. That's really, really important for yourself to recognize that you did make some progress, that you did do something for yourself. All right, so there are a lot of comments here. Let's go back into these. This is one from a while back. This is Colonel Kurtz. I want to be a better person and not be angry anymore. One step that was hardest was cutting out toxic friends who fell down the drug addiction route. I've had way less alcohol than most of my previous years. Yeah, I mean, that's another really important dimension, is thinking about who enables bad behavior, who supports good behavior and transformation. I mean, real friends, if they're good people, will want you to be developing for the better, right? Whereas people who want you to remain just the way you are because they're comfortable with you like that, they might be people that you need to spend less or no time with. Mark says, fall down 19 times, get up 20. Yeah, and that's I suppose better than fall down once, get up twice or something, because yeah, we're going to keep on falling down. I mean, unless any of us become like the ideal wise person, I've never met one in my life, we're all going to fall down sooner or later. Sunny Blue says, now as you raised, I'm more realistic and measured. Yeah, that's particularly helpful. And it's interesting. You could say, well, as we get older, this happens. And I don't think that it is actually a function of age or experience, because there's lots of older people who are still making foolish commitments that they can't possibly realize. And, if you think about, oh, I've only got maybe 20 years left, maybe you get more desperate, right? Ooh, I'd better get everything, all my ducks in a row this year. Blue Sky says, there's a phrase I saw on a t-shirt that stuck with me: do less, focus more. Yeah, so that can actually be quite helpful. Doing less, but the things that you do, doing so deliberately, thoughtfully, rationally, right? And that is tough to do. You can't just like snap your fingers and automatically do that. Let's see. Blank Name says, using guilt is exhausting later on and clouds my judgment in my experience. Yeah, guilt is not a particularly helpful emotion. I think that it can be better than nothing for some people, but as far as like personal development, it's something that can be helpful only really at the start. I don't think that it's something that can carry us through very well, right? So is it better to feel some shame or embarrassment or guilt when you're all screwed up? Yeah, maybe. But then then you want to have the moment where you're turning your mind or your soul, what they call metanoia, right? And start proceeding towards something else. Let's see. Mark says, essay says that, Shirley Ann says that embracing detachment is very helpful with humility. Yeah, and I brought up St. Anselm earlier today. I'm going to bring him up again. If you don't know, that's somebody who I do a lot of work on and have over the years, probably the person I've written the most about in my scholarly work. And in his Dicta Anselmi and De Similitudinibus, Anselm defines humility as like genuine knowledge of yourself. And if you really do know yourself, as you are, you're going to see the flaws, you're going to see the weaknesses, you're going to see where you failed and stuff like that. It doesn't mean beating yourself up or like lowering yourself. I am merely a worm or anything like that. But it does mean having a genuine understanding of who you actually are and what you're capable of and what help you need, right? So, if you want to diet and you need an accountability partner, then you need an accountability partner, right? So, there's a lot of things like that. Brett says, I like this. Routines are the boring key to life, truly. Yeah. And I think that's a great phrase, boring, right? I think a lot of people don't like routines precisely because they're not exciting. But if we want to produce lasting change that gets us towards our goals, then we really have to embrace the boring in that case. Um, all right. Colonel Kurtz says, I've lived in horrible conditions with drug addicts and violent criminals. Striking a balance between exercise and reflection helped, but I also needed to absorb my lessons. That's quite true. Socrates' great grandson says, author of Atomic Habits, James Clear says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become, and your actions reveal how badly you want something. I mean, yeah, I mean, these kind of slogans are a little bit too broad. Your actions reveal how badly you want something, unless they don't. Right? So, if you find those sort of one-liners helpful, that's great. I think we got to be careful in applying those because it's often a little bit more complex than that. So blank names, so it's funny. Blank name says I lost 50 pounds the last 1.5 years by mainly through dieting. So I lost lots of muscle. Yeah. I mean, you probably don't want to not exercise and just diet, but I suppose it's better to lose the weight than to have extra weight on. Blank name also says, what about something like finding a decent job? I have some disability, something that's necessary, but not completely up to us. What is a good way to go about it? So that's a great question. And, people may have other things like, I'm in my 40s, but I want to find the love of my life or something like that. So it really depends on a lot of factors, doesn't it? So decent job. Now, there's a lot of jobs out there right now, but a lot of them are not decent jobs, right? At least here in the United States. And I gather that that's the case in quite a few other countries as well. It may not actually be something that happens. There are many people who have a desire, a legitimate desire for a decent job that pays not, astronomically, but well enough to support themselves and their family, is interesting, feels like it's, doing something that's beneficial for other people, and that may or may not be available, and it might depend on where you reside. you know just here in Milwaukee, right? There are parts of Milwaukee. We have some of the poorest zip codes in the entire United States in this city because it's so massively segregated, and it may not be feasible for everybody to achieve it. Doesn't mean that you can't get a job, but it could mean that you can't find a job that actually satisfies those needs and requirements. Um, Now, here's an interesting thing too from blank name again. It doesn't feel good when I make some progress. It feels like I did so little, wasted so much time. So that is something that I think a lot of us do struggle with, right? Um, so that is something that is up to you, but it's not something that you can like immediately flip the switch. This is where habits and routine are involved, and it may take some, framing it, and as we say, fake it till you make it when you're trying to develop a new habit. So reminding yourself that whatever progress you made, even if it's little, it's still positive progress. Even if you can question it from other angles, that it is still progress, it is still some good, that might have to become a routine for you, right? And it may feel like totally weird. Like maybe you have to write it down on a piece of paper or put it into your phone, or I don't know, have somebody reminding you of that. And it'll feel weird until it doesn't feel weird. And that might take a month, that might take 3 months, it might take the whole year. But that would be something quite beneficial. Now here's a nice metaphor from Mark. Think like a person in a sailboat. You have your destination, your goal, but you have to adjust to waves and winds and tack against the wind. Yeah, that's actually quite good. You have to, if you say, on the other hand, I am going to sail for X and I'm not moving that rudder one bit, right? I'm not changing the sail position at all. I got to keep going the same way. Well, you're going to get blown off course and you're not going to get to where you want to go because there's all these other factors. So I really do like that metaphor quite a bit. Not an academic says, I've realized I've been in bad faith when it comes to avoiding my merits and qualities. These things are part of my facticity, but I've been avoiding it and thus lowering my self-esteem. So framing it in Sartrean existentialist terminology, bad faith being, doing something, committing to something and denying it at the same time. And then, your facticity, your merits and qualities, partly due to other things, could be your genetic inheritance, the fact that you were educated in certain ways. Some of it could be things that you've decided to do as well, right? That is your current condition, and that is your facticity. And so these things are part of your facticity. I've been avoiding them and lowering my self-esteem. That may be something you want to work on, right? Real Gee Machine says perhaps a goal that's very defined and not too limiting, giving up ice cream instead of losing weight or giving up sweets. Then we can practice control over our mind, even in this very limited sense. And yes, that can be incredibly helpful, I think, for people who need to start out small. Like if you don't have much control over what it is that you're eating, limiting yourself in one way and not like making up for it by, I didn't eat ice cream, so I'm going to eat a lot of licorice or something like that. I'm going to reward myself for my sacrifice by eating even more over here. That could be very, very good. And then what's nice about it too is you establish a habit. Okay, I'm not eating ice cream anymore. And then you're like, I was able to do that. Now maybe I can do it with something else. Again, it's like going to the gym, right? You start out just on the treadmill and you're like, I'm going to do 20 minutes of cardio. And, you're sweating and you're huffing and puffing. And you're like, this is terrible. How much more time do I have left? 18 minutes. This sucks, right? And then you get a couple months in and you're like, 20 minutes, that's not a problem at all, right? And then a little bit later, you're like, maybe I could start doing the rowing machine and adding that in, or the side stepper, or the elliptical, right? And, you do more and more of these and they add up to little wins. You don't have to, as they say, boil the ocean at the beginning. So, all right. Valia Daka says, I don't know what university to go to. I want to go and do history. When I think about having a stable job, I think about going for being an English teacher. I mean, there's not a lot of great stable jobs, I would say, in academia overall. And that's something that is kind of, at least in respect of getting hired, very much out of your control. But you can do the preparatory work, and if you're here in the United States, there's 3,000 different places you can get degrees. So, you got to kind of compare them. Colonel Kurtz says, I've noticed I let go of all my usual passions when I tried to focus more on exercise and fitness. I wouldn't want to live without poetry, but health takes so much time too. So that's a good example of, the sacrifices that we have to make. And, there's ways around that. You can, of course, like listen to recordings of literature while you're doing your exercise, but probably you can't pay as much attention, right? You certainly can't. I mean, some people are like, yeah, I listened to Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit as a book on tape. And I'm like, no, you don't. It's hard enough to do it just reading the damn thing. You're not getting anything out of it by just letting the stuff pour into your ears. But for some literature, maybe that's possible, right? Blue Sky says there's a paradox with progress. The more you know, the more you know, the more you know you don't know. It can feel like you're digging a hole. Yeah, but it doesn't have to bother you. I mean, that's an interesting point, right? So there's a lot of places where people will say, um, this automatically leads to that, and it doesn't have to. That's where we can exercise our freedom of choice. Mark says, Shirley Ann says it's very important to experience success in small things to encourage us to continue. Yeah, I would say that's quite right. All right, so there's a few questions in here that are not germane to the topic, so I'm not going to do those. All right, let's see here. Vegans staying a phenomenology of spirit during workout is absolutely insane. What the hell? Yeah, and so this is something that I didn't think about talking about, but when it comes to like realistic goals, so let's use Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. There's a lot of what I call texts with auras. I've got a video out there about it, one of my quick takes. And so there's a lot of texts where people are like, oh, I got to read the Phenomenology of Spirit, or my life is incomplete, or I got to read Spinoza's Ethics, or I got to read Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, or I got to read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, right? Or I got to read Plato's Republic. And no, you don't. You can live a perfectly fine life without reading any of those books. And reading those books doesn't mean, making a long march through them. A lot of people read them, but don't really read them. And, I've seen people saying, yeah, I like speed read through Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. And I'm like, well, you're not getting anything out of that. That's not going to work for you at all, right? So I think that it's similar to people saying, yeah, I'm going to run a marathon. Well, I mean, walk around your neighborhood first, right? Before worrying about even a 5K, let alone a marathon. All right, Socrates' grandson, Navy SEAL Jocko Willink's dictum is discipline equals freedom, meaning that by consistently applying discipline in your life, you gain the freedom to achieve your goals and overcome challenges. I mean, if you need somebody who bills themselves as a Navy SEAL to help you out with that, great. I mean, I think most of us don't. We can go to Epictetus or Seneca or, people that have a lot more to offer than, the prestige factor of a Navy SEAL. I mean, there's all sorts of, I'm not a big fan of elite military people because I think that a lot of them are often quite awful people. So I'm often suspicious of them from the beginning. All right. Here's a question about my own resolutions. Vahalia says, what books, philosophy, novels do you plan to read or reread this year? So I have a lot of commitments that I've made worlds of speculative fiction. I've got, 12 different 11, because I'm doing the Bulgarian over 2 months, 12 different book series that I'm reading parts of. I'm also teaching academic classes on anger and on philosophy as a way of life. So I've got a lot of rereading for those to do, beginning, basically now, because the classes start in less than 2 weeks. What else? I've got some pleasure reading that I want to do. Clients are always saying, hey, can we work on that? I've got a Heidegger book I've got to actually work my way through this weekend for a client meeting next Monday. So for me, the reading tends to be that kind of stuff. I'm also going to be finishing out some YouTube series on works that I started. Like I've got, I got to go back to Augustine's Confessions because there's a bunch of videos I've got to shoot on that. All right. So Joseph has an interesting um, or goal this year: less consumption, more creativity. Those are good. Really, two different goals there, which are not completely independent of each other. If consumption means something like media consumption, right, or just going out and doing what do they call it, retail therapy. All right. Not an academic has a good question here. I actually, by the way, did a quick takes on this a while back. Is it possible to be taking too long to finish text? It's been around a year and I'm still 60% through Being in Nothingness. There's so much on my reading list and I'd like to cover more this year. So that's actually a great question. And a lot of people do find themselves in that sort of situation. It takes as long as it takes. There is no, and a lot of people will come out with like, oh, it should be taking you this amount of time for this text. Complete bullshit. That is not the case at all. There is no like, it should only take this amount of time. That's, it's going to vary from person to person, how familiar they are with the language, with the mode of thinking, how deep they're going into it. It could be that you're getting more out of spending that time on it than somebody who, went to a great school and, had a famous teacher and they went through Being in Nothingness in a semester. I mean, maybe they didn't get that much out of it, but they thought they did. So that is actually an important thing to bring up. Blank name, got a good way, little tip here. Find it useful to walk instead of taking the bus when I return from my classes. Smart way to get some exercise. Yeah, walking is always good for us. Hafez says, this isn't really about the thing, so I'm not going to take that question. Blue Sky is a good question here. How much rereading do you do? I don't know, because a lot of what I do is rereading because I've been doing academic philosophy. Now, I mean, I graduated with my bachelor's more than 30 years ago, right? So a lot of what I do is in fact rereading, but I do a lot of reading too, I guess, reading new things. But it totally depends on what I'm teaching, what I'm writing on, what my clients need, all sorts of things like that. All right. So there isn't any real measure for that. All right. So let's talk about something we can do. Here's an exercise that when I do this as a in-person workshop, which I do, quite frequently at the beginning of each year. So here's an exercise for thinking about goals and resolutions. So you can take a resolution that you made or a more realistic goal, and you can go through a kind of checklist. And this is the first thing I have people do. So here's four things where you want to check the box. And they're all framed in terms of descriptive statements. So here's the first one. This is actually possible for me to fulfill in the coming year. A lot of people, I'm going to become as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger by going to the gym. No, not possible, right? Not realistic, not going to happen. I am going to cook all of my meals from scratch. Probably not going to happen, right? So it's got to be something. I am going to read a book every single day. I don't think so. I'm going to, figure out how to read one book a week. That's doable, right? Depending on what the book is. So, second one, my choices fundamentally determine success in this matter. So it doesn't mean that it has to be totally up to you, but that your choices really do, they're the most determinative factor, right? So whether or not, so to take an example, right? Whether or not you get a good job, you can apply for the jobs, you can go to the interviews, you can put together a good resume, but they can still turn you down, you know? So not really up to you. So that probably shouldn't be, a New Year's goal. Not to say that it shouldn't be a desire or goal to get a good job. It's just not this kind of goal, right? Another one, I can realistically say I possess the resources needed in order to realize the resolution. I am going to read 20 great works of philosophy that people talk about all the time this year. Do you have the resources to do that? Maybe not. I mean, I don't know that I would, let's say, Hegel's phenomenology, reread it, being in time, being in nothingness, Kant's first critique, lay all these things out. That would be tough for me to find the time. And I have a lot of resources. That may not be feasible for everybody. And then finally, this is really, really important. Fulfilling this resolution will significantly improve my life. We can use that to pare away a lot of things, right? I'm going to lose 50 pounds because I'm fat and I want to be able to live longer and feel better as I'm walking and not be out of breath. Okay, that might be something that'll significantly improve my life. I want to get down to 6% body fat so people can see my washboard abs. Is that really going to improve your life? I mean, if that's what your life is about, you might want to like think about other things, So, that's an important thing. Why are you engaged in the resolution? And then after you've gone through that checklist, if you've got a legitimate goal, what would it actually take to fulfill it? And I have people list like what 3 or 4 things they need to do to be able to fulfill that. If you're going to be doing a lot more reading, where are you going to be reading? What format are you going to have the books in? What works well for you? How are you going to make sure that you have uninterrupted reading time? Are you going to be involved in a reading group or something like that? Those are, sort of like means to that end. And then you got to figure out for yourself, and I think this is really important in advance, what counts as attaining success. You should write down what success will actually look like and why do that, because otherwise you don't know whether you're actually making any progress. You're just kind of meandering around. And then I think, and this is very important, and it's coming last, but I think it's really quite important. I desire success in this matter because, and then you have to articulate why this matters to you on paper. Explain it to yourself as if you're a different person. So, I want to be in better financial state and not have as many debts. Well, why is that important to you? Because I don't like feeling anxious about whether I'll be able to pay the rent. That's legitimate, right? That's perfectly fine. I want to lose weight. I want to exercise. Why do you want that, right? What is important about that for you? Those are, I think, good matters to think about. All right. So let's see here. We got some more questions. Ida says, my goal is Aristotle's Metaphysic. My friend, a philosopher, said the problem is it takes a lifetime to read it. So reaching my 60, I guess I'm busy. People do say stuff like that. It takes a lifetime to read a certain text, or it takes 10 years, but that's all bullshit too. There isn't any like the text takes this amount of time. And I mean, you can read the Metaphysics and you can certainly read it over the course of a couple months or a year. And the next time you read it, you probably get more out of it. If you know about like who Aristotle's talking about, it can be helpful, but it doesn't take a lifetime to read. People have slogans like that, but it's kind of they're just kind of showing off when they say stuff like that, I think. Blank name says, this is a good one. Actually, I have a goal like this as a professor too. My goal is not to leave assignments for the last minute in the semester for at least 4 of my classes. That's a great goal. That will certainly cut down on anxiety, and you'll have more control over your destiny, right? As a professor, you know what I like the least is grading. I hate grading, and I will procrastinate about it. And then I'll get, upset that I have to do grading instead of stuff that I want to do. Um, and I actually have a colleague who has the motto 1 week ahead of the students as far as like building class content. I like to have my classes built out ahead of time. Um, Colonel Kurt says, I used to only care about intellectual goals, completing graduate study under 25 years of age, taking IQ tests, reading high volumes. It wasn't the good life. I only felt dumber. Know thyself. Yeah, I mean, our relationships, our bodies, our practical life, very important for us. We're not just brains, going around on, like little arms and legs or something like that. We're whole people. Um, all right. Hafez says, how would you distinguish well-being from happiness or desire satisfaction? Which of these ties to an aim worth pursuing? I wouldn't, because all of those terms mean different things to different people. So it's not like there's any such thing as like well-being as such. There's well-being measured by this measure, by this measure, by this measure. There's all different understandings of happiness out there. Satisfaction of desire obviously plays a role in that, but some desires you probably shouldn't satisfy. Like if you're really into serial killing, that's probably not going to make you happy and, result in you sooner or later getting locked up. So I don't have to distinguish between those. That's sort of like big picture stuff that you worry about after you're actually like doing the work. Blue Sky, the problem I have is being able to recognize success and be satisfied by it. Now, those are two different problems, right? One of them being able to recognize success. Okay, that you can actually quite easily determine for yourself and write it down. Being satisfied by it, okay, that's a different matter. That takes a different kind of work to it, doesn't it? So that's a good issue to bring up. You want to ask yourself, well, why am I not satisfied? Is it perfectionism of some sort? Am I like overlooking the good that I've actually accomplished in the success? Um, let's see here. Blank name to measure progress. Sometimes we could use tools. Investing in a weight measuring tool was really good for me. Yeah, I mean, I think we call those scales, right? I mean, you just get on the scale and see whether you've lost some weight or not. And you can also, like, if you're doing weightlifting, you can think, well, did I actually like move up on this exercise or that exercise, or am I, holding steady? Which at my age, 53, can sometimes that's good enough. I'm consistently getting there. Sardier says, how do I get out of procrastination? Haven't been able to do so for the past few years. Okay, well, that's a good practical question. So part of it is to recognize that the past few years don't have to determine the future, right? So if you dwell on, I haven't been able to get out of it for the past few years, you can forgive yourself and move on and say it's a new day. Another thing is, recognize that doing a little bit now instead of like waiting for everything to fall into place is going to make you feel better. You'll get something out of the way. You won't necessarily accomplish the entire big task that you've set for yourself, but you can certainly get something done. Think about like homework assignments, right? If there's a homework assignment and it's got 5 parts to it, don't wait until the last minute to do all of those. Start on the first part, a couple weeks out, and then do another part, and then do another part. And then when you're in your final week, it can be like, okay, I've only got 2 more parts to do. Thank goodness that past me didn't screw future me over, right? Or present me. So that can be quite helpful. Colonel Kurt says, are we ever that good at deciding goals? When I was 12, I just wanted to make sparkler bombs and act up. Maybe I'm just as stupid now and my goals are not that great. You have to decide that for yourself. I mean, I'm pretty good at deciding goals. My wife is pretty good at deciding goals. My kids, who are 22 and 17, seem to be okay at deciding goals in some areas and not so good at others. So I wouldn't try to make a blanket statement about, are we ever that good at deciding goals? Clearly, a lot of people are quite good at it. And why wouldn't you want to join them? That's the question that I would say. When I was 12, yeah, I wanted to be a pyrotechnist, and then I wanted to be a botanist, and then I wanted to be this and that. And I went in the army because I intended to be a lifer or become a mercenary. Our goals change over time, but they don't always have to be as dumb as we thought they were. I mean, when I was in college, I wanted to party and get laid and have some fun and also study. And it turned out that all of those were possible. Sometimes they interfered with each other quite a bit, but we can certainly have better goals, right? Let's see here. Mark says that Shirley Ann says the fact that you recognize you're a procrastinator is good. This is talking to Sardar. Yeah, I mean, being able to see that it's a problem for you and identify that problem, that can be helpful. You think about people who struggle, say, with addiction, and the difficulty in realizing that you are not able to control yourself with respect to alcohol or tobacco or gambling or whatever other things one is doing, right? Let's see here. So I got a couple other questions that are a bit more broad, not really about this particular topic. I will say that people often ask me questions like this. Do you have a special method that you use when you read? I do not. I know there's lots of people out there who have the method, but I think all of that is mostly bullshit. Different things work for different people. What works for me won't necessarily work for you. Let's see. Real Game Machine, there's this idea of identity fusion and ACT. It explains why we are not satisfied with accomplishments. If I identify as a loser, I'll never be happy with my accomplishments. Yeah, that's quite true, right? So I don't think you have to go to ACT for that. I think you could find that in ancient Stoic philosophy or in all sorts of other areas as well. So yeah, that's a good place, I think, to leave off. A lot of good questions and comments. Some of the questions that people are asking that are about things that aren't directly related to this might be better for an AMA session, which we'll be doing later on this month. I will mention we're doing our AMA session. Usually we do it first Saturday, but I actually have an event this Saturday. I'm going to be emceeing a book launch, and I don't have the book handy here, but it's called Beyond Stoicism. It's by Massimo Pigliucci, Meredith Kuntz, and Greg Lopez. And so that might be of interest to some of you. AMA session will be, I want to say, on the 13th. And you can ask any sort of questions you want there. But I will say ahead of time, I don't have a system or single approach or something like that people could easily apply. Instead, I've just got some, sort of general takes. In some, Hobbit brings up the self-directed study videos. Some of those are in those self-directed study videos. So hopefully this has been helpful for at least some of you. And, it's good to reassess goals. It's good to think through new goals for the year ahead. I think that New Year's can be a decent time for that. It's interesting. Stephen asked any predictions for 2025. In my family, interestingly, when I was a kid, we would sometimes make New Year's resolutions, but we would always write down predictions on pieces of paper and then read those the next year. And we stopped doing that when it was Yeah, 1982. And my dad, who died in 1982, actually wrote, and so he must have known something was wrong. Tony Sadler will not be with us this New Year's, and we were all like, "Oh crap!" So that kind of put the kibosh on that. I don't usually make predictions anymore, and certainly the world is getting wonkier and wonkier, isn't it? So happy New Year to all of you, and we will leave off here. Thanks to everybody who joined and for your questions and comments, and I will see you at some other online event.